Hello and welcome to another episode of the Live Capoeira with Graduado Jabuticaba or Jabu to her friends. Thank you very much for taking the time and coming on.
Thank you for inviting me. I feel really honored to be here in the podcast.
Thank you. So let's start at the beginning then. How did your journey in capoeira begin?
I started capoeira in 2010 in Basingstoke. I knew what capoeira was before I started it, but I never really knew that you could learn it. I thought it was just for Brazilian people who are in the know, and only them they pass this to other people, and there is no way for others outsiders to learn. But actually, this was in the middle of me changing jobs. I moved to the UK a couple of years before, I think, for university, and I was changing jobs depending on the job. I was moving to one place from one place to another. And I ended up in Basingstoke. I was looking for things to do. I didn't have any friends. I didn't know anyone there. So I thought a good way to meet people would be to look for classes in a sports center. So I looked at the program in the sports center, and they had capoeira there. It took me, I think, 6 months to join the first class. I was really scared, not scared, but embarrassed. I was really shy. So I managed to convince a friend from work, my colleague, to join me. She joins the first class, but she really didn't like it. She didn't like the music. She didn't like the vibe. She actually said, "Oh, it's Hare Krishna music. I don't like it." And she didn't come back, but I really, really enjoyed it. And from that first class, I knew I wouldn't stop. So that was it. I fell in love with it, and I trained ever since.
What was it especially about first class that really captivated you?
A few things. I already knew what capoeira was, and I knew the amazing moves, how people, not just the kicks but also the acrobatics. And this was just a perfect start because it was a class for beginners. I knew everyone was similar level. I didn't have to know how to do a backflip or anything like that, and everyone was very welcoming. I think that was another thing apart from the movement and physical activity. It was just the kindness of people and friendliness. They wanted to make sure I enjoyed it. They wanted to know if I'm coming back. And that was really what captivated me.
You started your capoeira in Basingstoke, but obviously jobs and life lead you to move around a lot. How was your journey to being a capoeira teacher and finding classes and being able to stick with capoeira?
Um, it wasn't really, I wasn't planning on teaching. I started capoeira in Basingstoke with, at the time, I think it was Graduado Gringo, Capoeira Nago, now Contramestre. And I was always training with the same teacher. So starting with Basingstoke, then I found a job a few years later. I moved to London with work. There were no classes. Our group didn't have classes in London, but every week I would travel back to Basingstoke to train with my teacher. And also I trained in London with Capoeira Nago, later a little bit with Grupo Muzenza, just to make sure that I have some training there. And gradually, a lot of people from my group from Basingstoke also moved to London, including my teacher. And we started a group in London. It was then at the time in Hammersmith. So also quite a bit from where I live, because I live in Southeast London, and Hammersmith is in West London. So it's quite a way to travel, but I've been doing that all this time. The teaching only started in September last year. That's when I started the classes. And it was at the same time, it was kind of coincidence. I wasn't really planning it that much, but my teacher had a lot of work abroad. He left the country for some time. He wasn't able to teach. And also at the same time during COVID and after COVID, many people asked me when I was training in the local gym, many people asked me if I know about capoeira classes locally or if I teach. And I thought that would be a good way for me to learn to teach or practice to teach. and at the same time have classes somewhere close to where I live.
And your teacher, Mestre Gringo, he's set up Capoeira Flow, a sort of capoeira group. There's an app with that. How did that come
Mhm.
about? How did the transition from Capoeira Go to Capoeira Flow happen?
Capoeira Flow has been a brand of my teacher that he set up while he was still in Nago, and he used it to kind of create his brand and his own view of capoeira. And then I think it was in 2017. I'm not sure exactly the age, the year, but we left the group. He was then, I believe, professor um, just before getting his contramestre. It was just also a way of having a smaller group, having our own rules. Smaller group, there is less levels of hierarchy and a bit easier to organize things. But we are still in good relationships with the mestre. So my teacher's mestre is Mestre Pekines from Capoeira no Go, and he's still Contramestre Gringo's mestre. So
That's nice.
we're still in touch with the group, but we are separate.
And what plans have you got with your group in Lewisham? You started in September. Are you just seeing how the classes go before you start thinking about events like workshops or batizados?
Mm-hmm. It's very early days. We started pretty much end of September, and the classes are only once a week because this is how much I can dedicate the time. I also work full time in a professional job, so I don't really have that much time for teaching and also training myself and work and family life. But at the moment, there is no plan to organize my own event. The events will be still with Capoeira Flow, and that's our main group. But this Capoeira Lewisham is just my Instagram tag to separate the classes because we are in a different location physically. Certain things it's easier to communicate as a separate page, but we are very much still the same group, Capoeira Flow.
And for those listening who might also be thinking about starting or just started their own capoeira groups and teaching, what sort of advice might you pass on for other soon-to-be teachers of capoeira? If you were going to go back and visit your past self, what advice would you give yourself?
I don't know exactly what advice. I would just say you need to be prepared that it's really hard. It's really hard to bring the awareness to your class. There are many capoeira teachers around, maybe not in all the areas, depending. Here in the UK, there is a lot of capoeira groups, and especially in London, where I'm based, there are a lot of capoeira groups. Not so much where I am in Southeast London, but it's very hard because not only you're trying to market yourself as a new group, you have to think of the financial stuff, which there are a lot of aspects that many people don't consider before they start. So this is one thing in terms of finance and organizing, but also another thing is questioning yourself. I question myself all the time. Am I qualified enough? Do I know enough? Am I teaching people the right thing? What am I going to teach them next week? Are they happy with what I'm teaching? But it's a journey. You just have to start and carry on. And especially if your teacher, your mestre believes that you should be doing it, then just go for it. Trust yourself, your teacher. Do your best and learn as you go. I'm still learning a lot. I'm learning every week, every class.
That sounds similar to my experiences where I set up my group. It is hard work promoting.
Mm-hmm.
I did put some money into a Facebook ad, which did get me a few people, and I don't know if that would work these days though, because advertising on Facebook I think sort of changed, and social media moves on. I printed flyers, and it's walking around and putting them everywhere that you can, putting up posters and all the local little notice boards and news agents and takeaways and all the rest of it. And it is hard work to get the work out there. So
Yes,
if
you
you're
actually started a few years before COVID, I think.
yeah, so my group
Each.
started in 2015, 2014. I put the group on hiatus when my youngest daughter was born. So yeah, it will be 2015 when I started. And then my youngest daughter came along with two daughters, both quite young, I didn't have the capacity to run the group.
Mm.
COVID gave me an issue with my hip, but I'm hoping to get a group started again. But it's getting that momentum going and getting people coming. And then obviously there's that doubt when people come through your doors and they don't come back. I lost a student who I think got a bit bored, keep training the
Mhm.
basic and thinking about how to keep your lessons varied, but you also want the quality to be there. And I think drilling the basics is an important thing, but then also you want to keep your students entertained. There is a lot to think about, but it is very
Yeah,
rewarding.
just getting that balance, right? And you don't really know exactly whether you're getting it until some time after. You see if the students are happy, if they are coming back. That's when you find out. Sometimes they don't really want to tell you that they are not happy. People
Well, yeah,
don't really like giving negative feedback.
they don't. And I do try and encourage getting feedback. And it's also a tricky one to do as well, because it depends on the relationship you have with your students. I find like if you're asking them for feedback, they might be feeling, well, you're the instructor, shouldn't you know? But then other people have been quite receptive to it. And I think it's certainly a helpful thing when you get, especially your regular students, to sort of talk to them. Because I only found out secondhand that a student had left just because they've got bored. And that's fair enough.
Mm.
Um, but you look and you take that on. I know that especially at the beginning when you get a lot of newbies through the door, trying to have a structure of a series of techniques, and then you get another newbie through. Once things get a bit established, it can get a little bit easier because then if someone new comes through, you've got some students who got a little bit more experience, and then for them it doesn't hurt to revisit some of the basics and help each other out.
Yes, I'm still going through that period where there is a lot of people tried and come back, then sometimes not come back, or people who join one class, then they don't come back for a couple of weeks and they come back, and you have to keep repeating what you thought, but you're kind of, I think what you need to learn is what we are learning when we teach is to be a bit flexible. So I always try to think of different options. And I think, what if this person comes back because they have an injury? What can I do? This person who is more advanced, if they come, what can I do with them? So I'm trying to every time think of different versions of the class that I can do. But then when we are in the class, you end up improvising anyway. So you have a rough plan, but then you change it as you go. Sometimes you need to change it.
I don't know if you found, but I can remember sometimes as well. Your teacher move, and then they say something like, "What are you doing with your foot?" And you're like, "I don't know. What am I doing with my foot? Let's do the move again and think about it." And you're like, "Oh yeah, I'm pivoting on the ball of my foot." So I find teaching has
Yes.
found the same, helps you to think more deeply about the moves that you've done that you take for granted. And you might have forgotten some of those little details because maybe they didn't need to be pointed out to you, but they're not necessarily immediately obvious to everyone.
Yes, I definitely find that I'm learning myself to understand better what I'm doing and how I learned. Especially first few classes, I was thinking this was such a long time ago. I don't even remember how I was taught. So trying to think at what level do you start to teach people, whether that's going to be too simple or you're going to make it too complicated or they are going to be bored. So still coming back to that first conversation we had, it's getting the balance. But also, I wanted to go back to what we said about students coming and maybe not liking it, or some people try it and then drop off. I recently listened to a podcast. I can't remember what it was. What podcast it was. It was about capoeira, and they were discussing the same thing about students coming, trying, and then leaving. And actually, I realized it's fine. It's
Yeah,
fine for someone to try because capoeira is not, or capoeira is for everyone, but not everyone is for capoeira. Not everyone will like it. And if people come, try it, and leave, then at least we know it's not for them. Or maybe we are not for them because students and teachers also have to have a good match. And it doesn't mean you are a bad teacher. It just means maybe this is not the right fit. At least it was, you know this already,
yeah.
instead of investing time and then that person will drop off later or feel guilty about not coming or not being transparent. So at least you know who you're working with and the other person also doesn't waste time if your class is not for them.
Yeah, and that is the thing in those moments of doubt when you think, "Ah, why do I have these people coming through?" And it's exactly the same reason that it is okay. Not everyone is going to like all the exercise classes that they try, but it's nice that actually the word is getting out there. And at least if you give those people a positive experience in the room, and hopefully they'll still speak well of you, even if capoeira is not for them, like your friend that you took along to your first class. You
Yeah.
they really didn't want to see it again. How have they felt in touch with that friend?
Sorry, could you repeat?
Are you still in touch with a friend? It would be interesting to know if their thoughts of
Oh,
capoeira, seeing your
uh,
development with it.
no, actually, we lost touch. We are still friends, but we don't really talk much, so I don't really know what her take is on it. But I remember at the time after I started training, we were really good friends and we met a lot, and all I could talk about was capoeira. So she couldn't really get away from it completely because I was talking about capoeira. I don't know if you were going through that phase, but I wanted to do cartwheels everywhere and show my cartwheel to people who are really not interested in anything to do with capoeira or sport. But I was just so happy to be training and to learn things that I just wanted to show everyone.
Exactly. And how are you finding teaching the music as well? Does that surprise some of the students that come through your door, or do you find that they've actually got an idea about how it's not just sort of the martial aspect and the movements, but there's also the whole other sort of cultural and musical side to it?
With music, I don't teach it that much, or at least I only started recently because I think for some people who don't know what capoeira is, they are usually drawn first by the movement. And if I can get them to start with the movement, they are more likely to be open to the music, to history, to the culture. So I started with just the movement. Recently, we introduced some music before the class. We don't really have that much time during the week, and it's only 1 hour class. So I start doing this before the class or just a little bit during the class. I think they are finding it a bit strange to get involved into singing. I don't think they were expecting to have to sing, but we always have capoeira music during the class. So that was already in the background, so they had time to get used to it.
Excellent.
I think it depends on the person, but for people who don't know what capoeira is or are not very into culture, sometimes introducing all of the aspects of capoeira is maybe a bit of a shock. So I'm trying to do this in stages.
Yes, I think that's wise, especially because there is obviously so much to it that everything all at once can be quite overwhelming. And
Mm.
I'm just
How
when
did you feel when you started?
I'm just trying to think back. I think I had a bit of imposter syndrome, if I'm honest, as well. Sort of being there, particularly with the music, because I've struggled more with that than the physical side of things. I just found it harder to pick up. And I love music, but I know that. So I'm laughing. I was lucky enough to be at an event with Mestre Accordion in Swansea, and I ended up sitting almost next to him when he got us round to all sing a note. This was before I started to teach, and so he got us all to sing a note together, the whole group, and then he got us all to be silent, and he pointed at me to hold the note. I did my best. I made him wince, and then he moved on. And I
Oh
think,
dear.
unfortunately, my singing's improved, and but it's singing in tune and that side of things has been a struggle. And so then when you start teaching that, it felt like a big step up for me and my own practice as well. And certainly since my hips been a problem, I've been doing more musical training. I mean, musicality's got a lot better. I feel much more confident now with the musical side of
Mm.
things in class. But I still include it. I would always have the music in the background. I actually initially started in an MMA gym, and so didn't do much music there. But then when I got my second class a week up and running, the music was more prominent there. I think being at an MMA gym, it was just a bit easier to use things like bags and that sort of stuff. So you have slightly
Yeah,
different
the physical.
the Thursday classes than my Monday classes, where I bring that to back and bow in. We would actually get to have a go on those and use those and do orders and so on. Yeah, if people are listening who are thinking about starting, my experience is less recent, but I would say just do it
Mm.
and do think about the finances though, because when you do jump in, think about your whole hire costs. think about how much you're going to need to make. And especially at the beginning, you're going to need to probably invest some of your own finance into that to sort of get it up and running. And so save up for it. Don't put yourself into debt that's hard to sort of climb out of. So do think of the cost. And when I sort of sat down and initially started, I thought about, how much are the flyers going to cost to advertise it. I initially started with flyers
Hmm.
and posters, which I just sort of plastered as fast as I could. And it's then just sort of keep at it. The publicity certainly is one of those things that you need to keep going. you
Yes, definitely.
you get your sort of core students who do keep coming along, but then you get the more transient students, and then life happens. So I had a really keen student, but then they moved away, and and so on. And so actually, you need to keep having those. So try and with your costing, think about what profits you make. How can you sort of reinvest that back into more marketing? And for me, I'm in a fortunate position that when I ran those classes, my livelihood didn't depend on it. So breaking even was fine. But that's also the other consideration is if you're needing it as a more professional venture. For me, it was reward enough just to do it. But obviously, time's moved on. We've got a cost of living crisis, and there's nothing wrong with taking money for the time that you spend and the labor that you put in. But do think about that. I think those are the bits of advice I'd give.
Yes, I'm really glad that we are in a position that we don't really depend on these classes. I remember when teachers who were teaching me, they wanted to leave from capoeira, or they wanted to have their main income from capoeira, and it was really difficult. Even now, I think it's very difficult to have your main income from capoeira. And a lot of people have second jobs or even main jobs because capoeira doesn't really pay.
But especially in this country where it's not as popular as other places. And I think a lot of the capoeira instructors I know are in the same position, or they'll have a tangential job. So capoeira might be their main focus, but they would also be a personal trainer. And so
Mhm.
capoeira is one of the strings to their sort of fitness bow, and they'll be in the fitness industry. But it is difficult, and capoeira is never really something that you are going to want to choose as a rags to riches tale. But I think you
Yes,
get, I think
the pleasure is
well, that,
more rewarding. I think we don't do this for money, even though I'm not saying you shouldn't earn money from teaching, but we don't do this for money. Or myself, I'll speak about myself. I don't do this necessarily for money or to earn because I have a job apart from that. I do it for myself, for the pleasure of teaching. I learn a lot from teaching, and it's really rewarding seeing someone that improves or learns something, and it's because you taught them.
and how far around the world has capoeira taken you with your travels? Have you managed to do much training abroad? Has it all been focused in the UK?
In my first few years, I traveled a lot. I can't remember the first time I traveled was maybe a year after I started capoeira. I was with my first belt. I think my first travel was to Wolfsburg in Germany, and I traveled a lot across Europe. I went to Brazil. I went to New York, US, New York for a capoeira event. Uh, Boston, that was part of the same trip, Boston and New York. So it was mostly Europe, but I traveled a lot, and I almost traveled every month to some capoeira event, whether it was in UK or abroad, and I really loved it. These days, I'm not able to travel that much, just family work and just regular life. Especially after COVID, it's a bit different traveling. But I think this year I would like to spend some time and go to a few places, few events outside of the group, outside of the people that I normally train with. Uh, I really want to improve my capoeira as well, and you can't do that unless you go and train with other people, see new things, learn new things.
Yeah, it's certainly valuable. And I certainly find as a capoeira teacher that traveling around and going to other events, or when you have your own sort of events and other teachers come to you, seeing their different takes or ways of explaining things or training exercises and drills and their flavors of capoeira can add to your own teaching because as a science teacher as well during the day, I always like watching other teachers, whether it's capoeira or science, and just see how they do it and see what little ideas I can integrate into my lessons that might work for the way that I
Mhm.
do things.
And do you find that because you are a teacher by profession, does it help you to teach capoeira as well?
Yes, I think it does. I think the obviously having trained as a teacher, and I was already a science teacher before I started teaching capoeira. Um, I having had that training, it just sort of helps in terms of just sort of thinking about like a lesson plan and thinking about how am I going to structure what I'm going to do in this time that I've got, how we start. And it is helpful and you sort of think long term. You also sort of get that confidence of having to sometimes improvise depending on the students. So if you've got some bad knees and you're thinking of doing a lot of negative at that time, you're like, well, actually,
Not a
that's
good idea.
day. And if that gets sprung on you and that's new, you can think on your feet. But then also you can think, okay, well, I've now got the student. Negative is not for them. I don't want the other students to miss out. So then in between lessons, you can think, okay, what can I provide for them so that they can do an alternative that's not going to be so hard on their knees. Somebody else learns a negative. I think if you're not a teacher, the best thing to do is think about the teachers that you've had. How does it work? And remember that sort of structure. And for me, it sort of helped with timing and thinking that I think. But I've known some capoeiristas who will have a lesson plan that I'll actually physically write out. I found that
Mm.
it was enough to basically have the ideas in my head, so you could sort of plan for a capoeira lesson whilst you're driving or something, going just walking or just doing the shopping, and your mind's thinking about other things. You think, oh yeah, we'll do that, and oh, we haven't done that in a while. I think at the beginning I kept a log of kind of like the techniques that we had done to try and make sure that we covered things fairly evenly. But I didn't keep that up because actually it turned out to be a waste of time because it was then a bit tricky. If you had a student that was a bit sporadic, it's like,
Mm.
well, I get that or not. And so I kind of settled into trying to think of, I take it as like a month and think, what can we get into the month to make sure we've got maybe a range of floreos or kicks or skivas or whatever and combinations and mix it up. I think if I was going to come back and start classes again, I'd maybe give a bit more structure to the month. I might make
Mhm.
the second lesson of the month or whatever have more of a music focus, say, so that actually that's a time where maybe three quarters of the lesson are actually more musical. Um, Once the group was a bit more established and sort of fit into things like that, and then maybe have think, all right, it's the first one of the month. We need to be focusing on kicks a bit more, maybe a bit music, maybe a bit more that. But back at the beginning, I think it was more just about getting a sort of solid lesson out, starting to teach the basics and the techniques.
Yes, for me it's similar, and also because students often change. There are a few students of mine that are always there, um, but we had quite a bit of a break because we started at the end of September. Then December, our venue was closed, so we also closed for 3 weeks. We're literally just now started February. So there wasn't really that much time to create a proper, consistent, organized plan. But what I'm trying to do is focus for a couple of weeks on, let's say, one kick, and then try and introduce that, add movements from that kick, sequences from that, to make sure that if people have missed a class, they will at least learn something, and then we move on to the other. But I always try to incorporate a couple of kicks or movements or esquivas so that we train that for a couple of weeks. And that also gives the time for the students that are coming to learn this, because for them it's literally the first time that they are learning something. And if I recall going back to when I started, I didn't learn everything in one class. You have to repeat, you have to continue the same thing over and over again, especially some more complicated movements. That's pretty much how I'm doing it. And also depending on how many people we have in a class, I also try and do a little bit of a roda so that they get used to this. Because I also remember from my own experience, it took me so long to go into a roda to play with someone. And I want them to already be used to that, so that when we go to an event or we have our batizado, they are not scared to go in, that they can enjoy. it doesn't really matter how much you can do in a hot as long as you go in and just don't get kicked. That's
Yeah.
it.
Well, that's it. I think the hardest is there can be that anxiety to go in, but actually just jump in and actually what's the worst that can happen? Well, let's not
You
take that
think
too.
you think you're going to embarrass yourself. That's
Yeah.
what everyone thinks.
You always Voltamundo if you're feeling like sort of can't carry on. And generally again it's I think if people see someone struggling, they're often quite kind and buy you out. Um I think another good thing to have is, I don't know if you found this, but a standard sort of warm up and cool down at the very beginning and very end. I found that I sort of fell into a routine of having that. And then that's also helpful because sometimes, if traffic's unexpectedly bad and you're running late and your senior student can sort of go in and everyone knows the warm up. So if you do just arrive a little bit late, ideally that doesn't happen often, but it's just helpful. And then also having got that routine, when you get somebody that's new, if we're all sort of doing it together, everybody else that isn't you can very easily let the other person know what to
Yes,
do.
and also it's a good thing to build the fitness because a lot of people that start capoeira, some of them haven't done any physical exercise before. Some have, but it's a slightly different exercise. If you spend some time of the class to do a good warm up, to get everyone sweating, then you can spend the rest of the time on learning new stuff because this is much slower. They are not going to get as much physical exercise at the beginning because they are just learning how to do the steps instead of doing them fast or doing them, do as many repetitions in a period of time. So yes, that's a good point. Doing a good warm up, it's good in the class. By the way, I just remembered you were talking about Mestre Accordion in an event in Swansea. I don't know if it was the same event because I also went to an event in Swansea with Mestre Accordion, and I had a similar experience with music. He asked who knew a ladainha, and it was a time when I was actually really into music and I was learning a lot of music, but I was really shy. I didn't want to sing in front of other people. So one of advanced students, she was at the event with me, and she was actually sitting next to me, and she said, "Oh, Jabuticaba knows a ladainha." She said it out loud during the event. So Mr. Accordion called me up to sit on the bench in front of everyone, and he asked me to sing and play a ladainha. I and that was so scary because also I don't really normally practice. The time I didn't practice singing and playing Angola rhythm. All I was doing was Banguela and some singing of songs that we normally sing in the Roda. So that was really, really scary. I sang the song. I think I got it right. And then at some point he asked me, this is a very beautiful song. Do you remember who sang it? And I was so nervous. I completely forgot the name of the lady capoeirista who sang it. And it turned out it was his wife that sang it. And he actually only said it the next day in the Roda when he was talking about some movement, and he just said, "Oh, and that was the time when my wife when my wife composed this song." So that was a bit funny and mostly embarrassing moment for me because I didn't really want to play and sing, but the whole embarrassment just meant I forgot everything I knew.
Those events bear us forward. So the last question to ask, of course, is what is capoeira?
What is capoeira? I think it's a difficult question to answer because capoeira has so many different aspects of it. You've got singing, instruments, physical movement, history, culture, and I think that the main what can summarize is what Mr. Pastinha said. Capoeira é tudo que a boca come. Capoeira is everything that the mouth eats. And that's how I understand it. It's really, there are so many aspects of it that you can take from capoeira whatever you want to take from it. If you enjoy music, you can get more into music. If you enjoy more fighting, you can practice more the aggressive kicks and aggressive place. You like acrobatics, you can do more of that. And it doesn't even mean that you have to pick one or the other. There might be times where you like more. I go to some events and I feel like doing more acrobatic movements or doing more calm games, and I only go to those. I don't go to Sao Bento games. I don't buy those games because that's not how I feel at the time. So I think it's really, we can pick whatever we want from it. And that's the beauty of capoeira for me. You can never be bored.
Thank you very much for coming on and sharing your experiences. Are there any closing thoughts or comments you'd like to leave with our listeners?
The only comment I have is, if anyone out there is thinking or considering capoeira and thinking you're not fit, you're not at the right age, you're not something, don't hesitate, just try a class. Don't be embarrassed. Everyone is really welcoming, and it doesn't really matter a group that you join. Just try it and enjoy.
And if you do happen to be in, was it Southeast London, Lewisham, then we'll be linking to Jabu's lessons in the description.
Yes,
Uh,
please.
got We have another live event with Mestre Carlo. His new book, In Search Mandinga, Encounters Around the World, will be out in the coming days. And on the 7th of March, which is World Book Day, he will be reading from his book and discussing it and the different chapters, and also being there to answer some of your questions if you have them. So the link to the event is in the description. And when you buy your tickets for that event, you can also buy your book at the same time at a slightly discounted rate. So it would be great if you can join us on the 7th of March and get the book beforehand so you can come with your questions to the event as well. And we look forward to seeing you there.
That sounds good. It's always nice to listen from other capoeiristas, other people who train capoeira, and their views.
Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to that. And so thank you very much, Jabu, for coming on. It's been a pleasure to have you. And thank you, listeners, for listening. And until next time, ciao.
Thank you.